The world had ended quietly, in the way that only chaos could be silent. Buildings once full of life now stood hollow, windows shattered like empty eyes staring at a world that no longer belonged to humans. Smoke curled from distant fires, their origins unknown, a warning that danger lingered even where nothing moved. In the middle of it all, a man moved cautiously, boots crunching over broken glass and debris. He had no name to offer to anyone anymore, just the survivor, a title earned through days, weeks, months of walking alone. He ducked into the shadow of a collapsed wall as a moan pierced the stillness. Zombies, their movements slow and jerky, shuffled down the street, searching for whatever life remained. He pressed himself against the cold concrete, holding his breath, heart hammering like a drum. Even after all this time, the fear never fully faded. Not that it mattered. He had learned to move with the dead among the living, to see without being seen. His eyes, sharpened by constant danger, scanned for a path forward. Food had become a memory, a luxury that had to be replaced with ingenuity. He rummaged through abandoned stores, silently cursing the mess, the half-rotted contents. Cans of beans, boxes of cereal, and dusty bottles of water, some edible, some useless. He collected what he could, knowing that rationing was a way of life now. Water, especially, was precious. Without it, survival was only a matter of hours. The survivor stored what he could in his backpack, a tattered reminder of the past world, and moved on. As he walked through a cracked alley, his eyes caught a small patch of green behind a collapsed wall. Tiny shoots pushed through the broken asphalt, defiantly reaching for sunlight. It was a reminder of resilience, of life insisting on existing even here, among ruin. A spark of determination flickered within him. If plants could grow in this wasteland, then perhaps he could too, not just survive, but build a life, even in this broken world. He cleared a small corner, dragging some soil from the street into the tiny patch. Seeds scavenged from abandoned grocery stores found their place in the makeshift soil. Water was carefully rationed, every drop measured, every sprout nurtured. Time slowed in this new purpose, his mind focused not only on surviving the next moment but on seeing life flourish under his hands. Even in a world dominated by death, he was beginning to feel something he hadn't felt in months: hope. But the streets were never truly empty. From behind a corner, a low groan reminded him that death was patient. He readied his makeshift weapon, a crowbar, battered but sturdy, and moved silently into the shadows, aware that the dance of survival never paused. His life had become a balancing act between nurturing life and defending it. Every decision mattered, and tonight, as the sun dipped behind ruined skyscrapers, he vowed that he would protect the fragile green shoots growing under his care, no matter what the dead sought to take from him. Days blurred into nights, and the survivor's world shrank to the size of his small garden patch. The tiny green shoots had grown taller, fragile but stubborn, reaching toward the faint sunlight that filtered through cracked walls and broken roofs. He had built a crude shelter from scavenged wood and metal sheets, enough to protect him from the cold wind and the occasional wandering undead. Every morning, he checked the plants, watering them carefully, adjusting soil, moving debris that blocked the light. The act of nurturing life became a meditation, a fragile thread holding his sanity together. Food remained scarce, but he had discovered the satisfaction of small victories. He learned which leaves were edible, which roots could be boiled or roasted, and which seeds were worth saving. He scavenged the nearby city for containers and improvised planters, even using old buckets and broken furniture to expand his garden. Each plant was a victory, a testament to survival, a symbol that the world could still provide if one knew how to coax it into life. The survivor also developed routines to stay safe. Zombies, slow but relentless, patrolled the streets. He observed patterns, learning when the dead were more active, when the streets seemed momentarily clear. Every excursion outside the shelter was calculated, measured. Yet even with careful planning, close calls were inevitable. One evening, as he returned from a scavenging trip, he spotted a small group of zombies emerging from the shadows. His heart raced, but he remained calm, silently retreating into an alley and letting them shuffle past. Survival demanded patience, observation, and above all, stillness. In between these moments of tension, there was a strange sense of peace. The small garden thrived, leaves glistening after rain collected in broken gutters, shoots reaching for a sky free of pollution and noise. He began to experiment, planting herbs and small vegetables in abandoned containers, even using compost made from scraps he could find. The garden became more than sustenance, it became a statement of defiance, proof that life could persist even in a world that had forgotten hope. Nighttime brought reflection. He would sit beside the shelter, tending to plants by the dim light of a salvaged lantern. Memories of the old world surfaced, but he allowed them to float by, neither clinging nor rejecting. He spoke aloud sometimes, addressing the empty streets as if they were listening, naming the plants, giving them life beyond their physical form. It was strange, and perhaps a little foolish, but in isolation, even small acts of humanity mattered. Then came the first sign that he was not entirely alone. A faint rustle beyond the garden, a sound that did not belong to the wind or the occasional distant moan. He froze, hand on the crowbar, ears straining. Nothing moved, yet the air carried a tension he could not ignore. Perhaps it was another survivor. Or perhaps it was a predator, human or otherwise. Either way, the world had a way of reminding him that safety was temporary, and hope had to be protected with vigilance. Despite the uncertainty, he returned to his plants, brushing off fear like dust. Life, fragile yet persistent, demanded attention. And he, alone but determined, vowed to see the garden flourish, no matter what threats lurked in the ruins beyond his makeshift walls. The act of growing hope was itself an act of rebellion against the silence of the dead. The survivor had grown accustomed to the rhythm of solitude, the quiet punctuated by distant groans, the careful tending of his garden, and the slow march of time measured in the growth of leaves. But that rhythm shattered one morning, when a sound reached him that he had not heard in months, a human voice. Faint, frightened, yet unmistakably alive. It came from an old grocery store a few blocks away, the kind he had scavenged countless times before. His heart beat faster, curiosity mixed with caution. After so long alone, another person could mean danger, or salvation. He approached cautiously, moving along the cracked sidewalks, keeping low. Every broken window, every shadowed doorway, felt like a potential threat. The voice grew louder, a shaky call for help. It belonged to a woman, young, her fear palpable even through the distance. Her movements were erratic. She had clearly been alone for a long time. She was trapped behind a stack of overturned shelves, struggling to reach a partially blocked exit. Zombies wandered in the aisles, unaware of her presence. The survivor assessed the situation. Charging in recklessly would likely end in death. He had no weapons besides his crowbar, no guarantee he could protect her without alerting the undead. Yet he could not ignore her plight. Steeling himself, he crept closer, waiting for the right moment. When a zombie turned its back, he struck silently, knocking it to the floor with precise, controlled force. One by one, he cleared the way, keeping his movements deliberate and quiet. Finally, he reached her. She froze, eyes wide, panic mixing with relief. He raised a hand slowly, signaling that he meant no harm. "It's okay. You're safe now," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse but steady. She hesitated, then nodded, trusting him enough to follow. Together, they moved through the debris-laden aisles, avoiding the remaining undead. Every step was measured, every breath held, until they finally emerged into the open streets. Once at a safe distance, they collapsed onto the cracked pavement. She gasped for air, glancing around nervously. I thought I was alone," she whispered. "You're not," he replied simply. The words felt heavier than any weapon he had wielded. In the following days, trust grew slowly. She learned his routines, helped tend the garden, and shared her own knowledge of survival, where to scavenge, how to purify water, even which rooftops offered the best vantage points. They communicated mostly through gestures at first, then words, each slowly filling the void of silence that had defined their lives. Their small victories, watering plants, capturing rain, fortifying the shelter, felt monumental. The survivor realized something profound. Life, even in its most fragile form, was contagious. Her presence reminded him of laughter, conversation, and warmth, things he had long forgotten. Together, they were stronger, able to defend the garden more efficiently and navigate the streets with more confidence. But the world outside remained perilous. Every rustle, every groan, was a reminder that the dead were patient, and that their fragile bond could be shattered in an instant. Yet, for the first time in months, the survivor felt hope not just for the plants growing under his care, but for humanity itself. In this broken, silent world, he was no longer truly alone. Life, once solitary and predictable, became a shared rhythm. The survivor and the young woman, who now introduced herself as Alara, developed a routine that balanced survival with small bursts of hope. Together, they expanded the garden, moving containers, digging small patches into cracked pavement, and improvising irrigation from scavenged rain barrels. Each seed planted felt like a declaration. They would not just survive, they would live. Alara had a knack for organization and clever solutions. She suggested stacking containers to maximize sunlight, repurposing old plastic sheets to shield seedlings from harsh weather, and marking each row to keep track of growth. The survivor contributed what he knew about scavenging and defense. Together, they built small traps to catch rodents, fashioned rainwater collectors, and reinforced their shelter with scavenged wood and metal. Their skills complemented each other perfectly, and soon, the once fragile garden became a thriving patch of life in a world that had forgotten it. The days were not without danger. Zombies roamed near the perimeter, and every trip outside to scavenge food or supplies carried risk. One afternoon, while moving a heavy container to the garden's edge, a groan drew their attention. A small group of undead shuffled from the nearby street, attracted by movement. The survivor grabbed his crowbar, while Alara held a makeshift spear fashioned from a broken broom handle. Together, they worked in unison, striking and pushing the zombies away, using coordinated movements they had practiced during previous encounters. It was exhausting, frightening, but empowering. They had become a team, capable of defending each other as much as the fragile life around them. Evenings brought a calm that felt almost unnatural. They would sit near the garden, exhausted but satisfied, tending to plants by lantern light. Conversation grew easier, stories of past lives shared, and laughter, rare, fragile laughter, filled the small space. Alara told him of her family, of the world before the fall, and he shared memories of moments that now seemed distant and surreal. The dead might haunt the streets, but around the garden, life persisted. As their skills grew, so did their ambition. The survivor suggested building a small rainwater reservoir using scavenged barrels, while Alara proposed a makeshift compost system to enrich the soil. Every improvement strengthened not only the garden but their sense of control in a world that had taken everything else. Even minor victories, a sprouting tomato plant, a newly dug irrigation trench, felt monumental. Yet, a shadow lingered over their hard-earned peace. The city beyond their garden remained unpredictable, full of the dead and other survivors whose intentions were unknown. Every day brought small choices, whether to scavenge or stay, whether to fight or hide. And in the quiet moments, they both understood that survival required more than tools and skill. It demanded trust, courage, and the stubborn will to protect life against overwhelming odds. By combining their talents, the survivor and Alara had created a fragile sanctuary. And though the streets beyond remained dangerous, inside their small oasis, hope was tangible, a living proof that even in the shadow of death, life could be cultivated, nurtured, and defended. The survivor and Alara had settled into a rhythm, but supplies in their small corner of the city were running low. Cans of beans had dwindled, water barrels needed refilling, and the garden, though thriving, could not yet sustain them fully. They realized that to survive, they had to venture beyond the familiar streets, into areas long abandoned, where danger awaited at every corner. Early one morning, before the sun pierced the horizon, they packed light. The survivor carried the crowbar, a small knife, and a backpack filled with essential tools. Alara carried a makeshift spear, a collection of small containers, and a sturdy bag to carry anything they found. They moved cautiously, sticking to shadows and broken alleyways, avoiding the main streets where the dead were most numerous. Every rustle of paper, every distant groan, made them pause, hearts hammering in unison. Their first stop was an old pharmacy, a building that had long since surrendered to decay. Windows were shattered, shelves overturned, and dust coated every surface. The survivor knew the risks. The building could be home to more than just zombies. Yet the potential reward outweighed fear. Carefully, they entered, moving silently, checking corners and scanning aisles. Alara found a small cache of bottled water tucked behind a toppled display. The survivor discovered a few cans of food, some medical supplies, and even a small pack of seeds, an unexpected boon for their growing garden. As they prepared to leave, a sound froze them, the shuffling of feet, heavier than a zombie, more deliberate. From the shadows emerged a figure, human, ragged, desperate. The survivor and Alara froze, weapons raised. The stranger paused, hands raised in surrender. Fear and suspicion battled with the basic human instinct for compassion. After tense moments, the stranger spoke, voice cracked, "Please, I'm not one of them." The survivor and Alara exchanged a glance. They had learned to trust instincts, but also to weigh risks. Slowly, they lowered their weapons. The stranger introduced himself as Kieran, a man who had been surviving alone in the northern district. His knowledge of the city was impressive, and he offered information about other safe zones, abandoned food caches, and dangerous areas to avoid. With Kieran in tow, their journey back was both cautious and purposeful. They moved as a trio, covering each other's blind spots. When a small group of zombies appeared near an overturned car, they worked in unison, distractions and strikes timed perfectly. By the time they returned to their garden, the sun had set, casting a golden glow on the thriving plants. That night, around their small fire, they shared the day's discoveries, divided food and water, and planned for tomorrow. The addition of Kieran introduced new skills, new knowledge, and, unexpectedly, a sense of camaraderie that had been missing even with two people. Life, in the apocalypse, was not just about surviving, it was about forging bonds, building trust, and learning that hope was stronger when shared. Even as they rested, the survivor looked around the small garden, the flickering firelight reflecting in Alara's eyes, Kieran's cautious optimism, and he realized that their makeshift community was growing, not just in numbers, but in purpose. Together, they could endure more, fight harder, and nurture the fragile sprouts of life that stubbornly clung to existence in a city ruled by death. With Kieran now part of their small group, the survivor and Alara realized that their garden and shelter could no longer remain just a hidden patch of life, they needed a real sanctuary. Resources were still limited, but with 3 sets of hands, ideas flowed faster, and tasks became more manageable. Each day began before sunrise, moving through the ruins with purpose, reinforcing walls, expanding the garden, and preparing for inevitable encounters with the dead. The survivor focused on defense. He scouted the perimeter daily, identifying weak points in their makeshift barricades. Broken fences were replaced with salvaged metal sheets, and spikes fashioned from old furniture lined the entrances to slow down intruders, human or otherwise. Alara managed the growing crops, teaching Kieran how to plant herbs, root vegetables, and seedlings in improvised containers. Kieran's contributions were strategic. He suggested elevated garden beds to protect against flooding and pests, and devised simple pulley systems to carry water from rain collectors. As days passed, small routines became their backbone. Mornings were spent scavenging and improving defenses, afternoons tending the garden, and evenings sharing stories or planning for the next day. They celebrated small victories: a tomato plant bearing fruit, a rain barrel filled to the brim, a particularly stubborn weed finally uprooted. Every success strengthened their resolve. The garden was no longer just a source of food, it was a symbol of their survival, a piece of the old world they could reclaim. But survival was never without risk. One afternoon, while fortifying the fence along the southern edge, Kieran spotted movement. A small group of zombies approached, attracted by the faint sounds of activity. The trio coordinated seamlessly. The survivor distracted them with noise and movement, while Alara and Kieran guided the undead into a narrow alley, where the makeshift spikes slowed their advance. Quick, decisive action kept them safe, but the encounter reminded them that even fortified walls were only temporary protection. Vigilance was a constant necessity. Nightfall brought quiet reflection. They would sit together in the shelter, sharing the limited food and water they had scavenged, and marvel at the thriving garden. Conversations became more personal. Dreams of what could exist after the apocalypse, memories of the world before, and hopes for rebuilding something resembling normal life. Laughter, once rare, became more frequent, a balm against the constant tension of the outside world. Yet, even as they found comfort, the survivor understood that the sanctuary was not yet complete. The world outside remained unpredictable, and their small group would need every advantage to survive. Plans were made for hidden escape routes, additional rainwater collectors, and discreet traps to secure the perimeter further. They trained together, practicing silent communication, understanding each other's movements, and preparing for threats that would inevitably come. By the end of Chapter 6, their sanctuary had transformed from a fragile patch of green into a small stronghold, a place where life could not only survive but thrive. And with each fortified wall, each thriving plant, and each shared meal, the survivor, Alara, and Kieran felt a little more human, a little more alive, and a little more prepared for the challenges the world beyond would throw at them. Life in the sanctuary had become routine, almost comforting, but the world beyond their walls was anything but predictable. One overcast morning, while scavenging a nearby apartment block for food, the trio stumbled into a situation that reminded them how fragile safety truly was. Broken furniture and overturned tables littered the hallway, the faint smell of decay hanging in the air. Shadows moved unnaturally, and before they could fully assess, a group of survivors, humans, not undead, emerged from a corner. The strangers were ragged, armed with crude weapons, and wary. Their eyes flicked suspiciously over the trio, sizing them up. "Food? Water? Trade?" one of them asked, voice rough and edged with desperation. It was clear they had been surviving on scraps, just like everyone else. The survivor instinctively tightened his grip on the crowbar. Alara's hand went to her spear. Kieran subtly shifted his stance, ready for a confrontation. Negotiation was tense. Words were measured, trust non-existent. These were humans shaped by fear, not collaboration. The strangers pressed for resources, claiming hunger, claiming survival, claiming necessity. The trio knew that giving in could mean losing the little they had, but refusing could spark violence. The room held its breath as threats hung in the air like a storm cloud. Then came the subtle movement, a zombie, drawn by the noise, shuffling into the corridor. Instantly, all hostilities paused as survival instincts took over. The trio moved in unison. The survivor used the crowbar to push the undead back. Alara jabbed with the spear. Kieran distracted it with a loud noise to lure it away. Their cooperation in action revealed a silent truth. Efficiency and skill outweighed fear and suspicion. After the immediate danger passed, tension remained, but something had shifted. The strangers had witnessed their coordinated effort and, grudgingly, respect was earned. Negotiation resumed, more cautiously. The trio offered a small share of food, just enough to maintain goodwill without jeopardizing their sanctuary. They set clear boundaries. No long-term dependence, no weapons crossing the threshold, no surprises. Returning to the sanctuary, the trio was quiet, reflective. The encounter had reminded them that danger was not always undead. Humans, desperate and unpredictable, could be just as threatening. Yet it also reinforced their reliance on one another. Alone, each might have struggled. Together, they were capable of measured strategy, resourceful action, and surviving threats both living and dead. That night, as rain tapped softly against their makeshift roof, the survivor tended the garden with a renewed sense of purpose. Each plant, each seedling, each fragile sprout was more than food, it was proof of persistence, proof that careful planning and teamwork could sustain life. Alara and Kieran worked alongside him, laughter quieter than usual, their movements purposeful. Every small act of cultivation, every shared responsibility, reinforced the sanctuary's growing resilience. The world outside remained hostile, but within their walls, they had learned a crucial lesson. Survival depended not just on tools, weapons, or plants, but on trust, coordination, and the willingness to act together when the unexpected struck. And as the night deepened, the survivor realized that this fragile bond, tested by zombies and humans alike, was the most precious thing they had cultivated. The encounter with desperate humans reminded the trio that survival meant more than protecting themselves, it meant creating a sustainable life. They returned to the sanctuary with renewed purpose, focusing on expanding the garden beyond its modest beginnings. The survivor, Alara, and Kieran spent mornings scavenging soil, containers, and tools from abandoned buildings, turning every scrap into an opportunity. Broken crates became planters, discarded pots held seedlings, and old gutters were repurposed into irrigation channels. Alara took the lead on planting new crops, sharing knowledge she had gathered from survival guides she had scavenged months ago. She taught the others about companion planting, tomatoes near basil to repel pests, carrots alongside onions to enrich the soil. Kieran experimented with vertical gardens, stacking containers to maximize sunlight while conserving precious ground space. The survivor, meticulous in his approach, mapped the garden, noting which areas received the most light, which spots needed drainage, and which were most vulnerable to the elements. Each day, the garden grew a little larger. Lettuce, radishes, herbs, and even the first fragile tomatoes began to thrive under their combined care. The act of cultivating life became a source of morale, a tangible reward for the endless work and vigilance required in their hostile world. Nights spent around the fire were filled with conversation about future expansion, irrigation improvements, and seed-saving strategies. Each discussion, each plan, brought them closer together, building not only food security but trust and camaraderie. They also discovered the value of resourcefulness. Rainwater was collected in every available container, filtered through improvised systems to keep it clean. Composting scraps allowed soil to regain nutrients, and they experimented with small indoor sprouts to ensure they had greenery even during harsh weather. Every innovation, no matter how minor, strengthened the sanctuary and reduced their dependence on dangerous scavenging trips. Yet danger was never far. One evening, while adding supports to a vertical garden near the fence, they heard groans from the street below. A lone zombie had wandered too close, attracted by their activity. The survivor nudged Kieran, signaling a plan. Alara's spear was ready, the crowbar in hand. Together, they guided the zombie away using coordinated movements, trapping it behind a barricade without taking unnecessary risks. It was a small victory, but a vital reminder. Life could flourish, but only with constant vigilance. By the end of the chapter, the garden had transformed into a miniature ecosystem, with thriving vegetables, herbs, and seedlings stretching toward the sun. The trio rested beside their creation, pride and relief mingling in quiet smiles. They had not only survived, they had learned to cultivate life in the shadow of death. In that moment, the survivor felt a sense of achievement deeper than any scavenged food or defended wall could provide. They were no longer just surviving, they were building a future, one small leaf at a time. The sanctuary had grown into a small oasis of life amidst the decay, but the world beyond was never forgiving. One evening, as the trio worked late in the garden under the dim glow of a lantern, a low, guttural roar echoed through the empty streets. It was deeper, more aggressive than the usual wandering undead. The survivor froze, recognizing immediately that this was not a single zombie. They were being hunted by a pack, drawn by sound, movement, or scent. Kieran blocked the western gate. He commanded, voice firm. Alara's spear was already in hand, and her eyes scanned the perimeter. Their hearts pounded, but training and experience guided every move. Together, they barricaded entrances, reinforced the weakest points of their walls, and prepared traps. Broken bottles, sharpened stakes, and improvised tripwires would slow the horde, giving them a chance to defend the sanctuary. The first zombie stumbled into the trap, screaming unintentionally as it impaled itself on sharpened stakes. The noise attracted the others, and soon the street outside was filled with a mass of shuffling, snapping figures. The survivor, Alara, and Kieran coordinated silently, using distraction and precision strikes. Kieran led zombies into narrow alleyways, where the spikes and barricades did the work. Alara moved swiftly, stabbing or pushing zombies away from the garden, while the survivor defended the main gate with his crowbar. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. Every strike required focus. One mistake could mean a breach. Exhaustion set in, muscles ached, but neither fear nor fatigue could dominate them. They fought as one, their previous experience in smaller encounters paying off. Yet this horde was relentless. One zombie broke through a barricade, forcing them to improvise quickly. Using a metal sheet and debris, they funneled it back toward a narrow corner where it could be safely dispatched. Finally, as dawn crept over the ruined city, the last of the horde had been eliminated or trapped. Silence returned, heavy and tense. The trio leaned against each other for support, breathing hard, bruised, and covered in grime. They had survived, but the experience left them shaken. This was a warning. Even in their fortified sanctuary, the world outside remained unpredictable, dangerous, and relentless. After tending minor injuries and catching their breath, they surveyed the sanctuary. Several plants had been damaged, barricades compromised, but the core of the garden remained intact. The attack was devastating in scale, but it reinforced their commitment to growth and survival. They had defended life itself, proving that determination, trust, and teamwork could withstand even overwhelming odds. That night, as they tended the damaged plants and repaired barricades, a quiet understanding settled among them. This was only the beginning. They were no longer just survivors, they were defenders, caretakers, and strategists. Every challenge faced would shape their resilience, fortify their skills, and deepen the bond that kept them alive. The world beyond would continue to test them, but within the walls of their garden, life, and hope, persisted, stubborn and unyielding. The attack had left the trio exhausted but determined. They knew that survival depended not only on defending their small sanctuary but on finding allies, learning from others, and expanding their network of support. With Kieran's knowledge of the northern district, they planned a careful excursion into the city's abandoned outskirts, areas they had previously avoided due to rumors of roaming zombies and hostile humans. They left before dawn, moving silently along cracked sidewalks and through overgrown alleyways. Each step was deliberate, each shadow examined for potential threats. The survivor carried his crowbar, Alara's spear glinted in the weak morning light, and Kieran led the way, scouting for both danger and opportunity. Their goal was clear: locate other survivors, exchange knowledge or resources, and perhaps expand their sanctuary into something larger. Hours passed with little success. Buildings were mostly empty, their contents long looted or decayed. Yet the absence of life was a form of danger itself, leaving them tense, ready for anything. It was near the old train station that they heard voices, faint but unmistakable. They moved closer, hearts racing, approaching a partially collapsed building where two figures were barricaded inside. The survivors, siblings, a young man and a teenage girl, had fortified themselves with scavenged wood and metal. They were wary and frightened, having narrowly escaped a zombie attack days before. The trio approached cautiously, hands raised in peace. Trust was slow to build. Words were exchanged carefully, each party wary of deception. Slowly, the siblings relaxed, allowing the trio to assist in repairing their barricade and sharing some of the limited food they carried. While working together, the survivor realized how critical collaboration could be. Each person brought different skills. The siblings had experience scavenging safely, the trio had knowledge of gardening, fortifications, and zombie evasion. Together, they shared strategies for sustainable living, resource management, and defense. It became clear that a larger network increased their chances of surviving both the undead and desperate humans. By nightfall, the small group returned to their sanctuary. The siblings carried seeds, small tools, and hope, ready to contribute to the growing garden. Their presence transformed the sanctuary once more. It was no longer just a place to survive, it was a hub of life, learning, and preparation. Plans were made for further expansion, better irrigation, and improved defenses. As they settled for the night, the survivor reflected on the day's events. Humanity, fragile as it was, could still flourish when individuals trusted one another, shared knowledge, and defended life together. Every new ally strengthened not only their chances of survival but also the spirit of hope that had taken root in the abandoned city. And yet, as they tended to their growing garden, repaired barricades, and prepared for tomorrow, they knew the world beyond was relentless. There would be more zombies, more human threats, and more challenges that would test their skills, their courage, and their bond. But for the first time since the apocalypse began, the survivor felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, the faint, unshakable belief that life could endure, and that together, they could rebuild it, one careful step at a time. Life in the sanctuary had grown busy, almost bustling, but the constant presence of danger ensured that complacency was never an option. The group, now 5 strong, had a clear routine. Mornings were devoted to scavenging and reinforcing defenses, afternoons to gardening and tending to their growing food supply, and evenings to planning and sharing stories. Each day tested not only their skills but the bonds that held them together. The survivor noticed subtle changes in the group. Trust was no longer tentative, it had become instinctive. Alara and Kieran communicated silently during scavenging runs, anticipating each other's movements. The siblings, though younger, quickly adapted, learning how to identify safe paths, recognize zombie patterns, and set improvised traps. Even minor victories, like successfully expanding a vegetable patch or repairing a weak fence, felt monumental, a shared triumph that strengthened their sense of community. But the world beyond the sanctuary remained merciless. One afternoon, while reinforcing a perimeter near the northern edge, the group spotted movement on the rooftops of nearby buildings. A small horde of zombies had gathered, their slow, shambling forms blocking any easy route of escape. The survivor quickly assessed the situation, devising a plan to funnel the horde into a narrow alley where makeshift spikes and barricades could neutralize the threat. Alara led the first diversion, moving swiftly to draw the zombies' attention while Kieran and the survivor positioned additional barriers. The siblings followed directions flawlessly, luring a few stragglers into traps. Coordination, timing, and communication were critical. One misstep could have allowed the horde to breach their sanctuary. After tense moments, the threat was contained. The group exhaled, exhausted but exhilarated, a tangible sense of accomplishment hanging in the air. That night, around the dim glow of a fire, they discussed strategies for future challenges. Training had become a central part of their routine, practicing silent communication, reinforcing barricades quickly, and working together to protect the garden. Each member had a role, and each role was essential. Even during moments of rest, they shared knowledge, teaching each other how to identify edible plants, improve irrigation, and make weapons from scraps. The survivor reflected on how far they had come. From a solitary existence filled with fear and loneliness, they had built a community where life thrived, where laughter and conversation returned, and where each person felt valued. The garden, once a tiny patch of hope, had become the heart of the sanctuary, a symbol of persistence and resilience. Yet beneath the sense of progress, a quiet understanding remained. Survival was never guaranteed. Every day brought new challenges, whether in the form of the undead or other desperate humans. But they had proven, time and again, that together, they were stronger than any threat. Bonds had been forged in fire and fear, and those bonds would carry them forward, nurturing life in a world that had long since forgotten it. The survivor looked around at his companions, the plants thriving around them, and the small, fortified walls of their sanctuary. Hope, fragile yet persistent, had taken root, not just in the soil, but in their hearts. And with each challenge they overcame, that hope grew stronger, ready to face whatever the apocalypse would throw at them next. The garden thrived like never before, a green heartbeat amidst the gray ruins of the city. Flowers had begun to bloom alongside vegetables, signaling not just survival, but life in full persistence. The survivor, Alara, Kieran, and the siblings stood together atop a small mound of debris, looking out over their sanctuary. The once desolate streets now held signs of potential: collapsed buildings that could be repaired, small gardens that could be nurtured, and a faint smoke plume on the horizon, another survivor, perhaps, reaching out in hope. Their small community had learned lessons of cooperation, vigilance, and resilience. They no longer moved purely for survival. They planned, built, and dreamed. Water collection systems were more efficient, the garden had multiple thriving plots, and barricades were stronger than ever. Each member had a role, and each contribution mattered. Even the youngest sibling had learned to scavenge carefully, to plant, and to watch for danger. As the sun dipped behind the skeletal skyline, the survivor envisioned a future beyond mere survival. Perhaps they could link with other survivors, forming a network of safe havens. Perhaps the city could slowly be reclaimed, block by block, garden by garden. The seeds they had planted, both literal and metaphorical, were proof that life could endure. Every leaf that reached skyward, every fruit ripening in the sunlight, was a message. The apocalypse could not erase humanity's ability to nurture, to adapt, to hope. Alara placed a hand on the survivor's shoulder. "We've done more than survive," she said softly. "We've built something worth fighting for." The survivor nodded, a quiet smile forming. It was not just about defending life, it was about growing it, teaching it, sharing it, and protecting it in a world that had forgotten kindness. The city remained dangerous, the undead a constant threat, and humans unpredictable. But for the first time, the survivor truly believed that the world they had left behind could be rebuilt, not as it was, but as something better, more intentional, more alive. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was theirs to shape. And in that uncertainty, hope flourished, stubborn and unyielding, just like the plants they had nurtured from seeds in cracked asphalt. The sun sets over the city, casting a warm glow on the thriving sanctuary. The survivor, Alara, Kieran, and the siblings stand together, looking over the garden that symbolizes life, resilience, and hope. Their journey has been long, dangerous, and challenging, but they've proven that even in the darkest world, humanity can endure when people work together and protect what matters most. If you enjoyed following this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of their journey. Hit the like button to show support and share this video with your friends who love adventure, survival, and post-apocalyptic tales. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below. What would you do if you were in their shoes? How would you survive the zombie apocalypse? Your ideas might even inspire future stories for the channel. Remember, every small act of kindness and teamwork can make a difference, just like the characters in our story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Stay strong, stay creative, and keep surviving, because hope grows, even in the darkest of times.